Thank you very much. Well, let me say that first I would like to say hello to everybody, wherever you are in the world. I should say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This conference is about intelligent systems. There are different approaches to build intelligent systems. The approach I will argue at the moment and in the next 30 minutes is called brain-inspired approach to build intelligent systems. Why brain-inspired? Because is there anything that is called intelligence outside the human brain? Not yet. Well, we talk about artificial intelligence, but it is not the real one. And if we use some principles from the human brain, how can we build artificial intelligence that is more efficient, more transparent, so we can actually use this towards the open artificial intelligence stream development? And this is the abstract that is already on the website of the conference. Now, what I will talk about is first, let us have a look at how the human brain learns. And the human brain learns in time and space. And this is something important to keep in the future. How do we build brain-inspired systems from simple ones, for example, spiky neural networks, to more complex one, brain-inspired spiky neural networks? And I will take one example, which is such architecture, brain-inspired architecture called NeuCube. How do we do knowledge transfer between humans and machine if we use brain-inspired spiky neural networks? And what about implementations? Is it difficult to implement them? And discussions will give some indication for the future work that my group, myself, and many other people all over the world are doing at the moment. And in these 25 minutes, say, I cannot talk much about all these topics that are deep in content. And I will miss a lot. And this, what I miss, is mostly presented in a book, which is called Time, Space, Spiky Neural Networks and Brain-Inspired Artificial Intelligence, recently published by Springer. First of all, how does the human brain learn? It learns in time and space. There are several types of learning that are manifested in the brain. One is called transfer learning. It means that what the human brain learns first, then some new information comes and it is added to the previous one, utilizing part of it, part of the previous one, always incrementally learning. Transfer learning happens in the structure of the brain through clusters that are formed during the learning in space and in time. And time in the brain is learned in many aspects: nanoseconds, milliseconds, minutes, hours, many years of evolution. And transfer learning occurs as several memory types of the brain, short-term, long-term. One example of transfer learning is learning languages. If we learn one language, it actually overlaps with another one, and we learn all the time new languages and improve the language. This is the so-called transfer learning of the brain. Again, it happens in space and in time. But my goal is to try to see whether we can transfer some knowledge from the human to machine. And this knowledge, for example, could be how this machine or robot will shake hands with humans. We transfer our signals, brain signals, to this machine, so this machine can naturally do handshaking with humans. And this is very much also part of a project, DARPA project in the United States, where they talk about open and explainable artificial intelligence. Let us see how the brain actually learns to see a cup and to take the cup and probably have a cup of coffee. So when the object is seen, The information goes through several areas in the visual cortex and the premotor cortex, and the motor cortex actually does the job, grabs the cup of tea. So this is a trajectory that is learned during many attempts in the past. And if we pass this information as brain signals to a machine, can we make a machine or robotic hand to take a cup of tea and give it to the paraplegic person? Well, that is what I'm going to talk about as an example, as also as principles. Well, first of all, how do we transfer humans' knowledge from one another? If we look at people's brains, actually, people who are involved in one conversation or doing something or playing the same music, we can see that after some time, brains synchronize. So this synchronization between humans, we can try to achieve between machines. So machines that learn from different brains can synchronize over time if they are doing the same thing. Spiking neural networks are the recent development of the so-called neural networks that follow some principles of the human brain. Information here is not represented as colors, but as spikes over time. We have trains of spikes going to one neuron. If this neuron receiving many spikes over time, its membrane potential reaches a threshold, then this neuron emits a spike. And then this process starts again and again. A very simple function of a simple neuron, but altogether, such neurons, hundreds and thousands, can do what we actually do. Now, how do we make such spiking neurons learn from data? The usual learning rule is called Hebbian learning rule in neural networks, where it is said that if they fire together, they wire together. But there is no time in the Hebbian learning rule. There is no time in the deep neural networks. No time learned in the connections. But here, in spiking neural networks, there is slightly different, but very important difference rule, which is called spike time dependent plasticity. It is just one of them. And one neuron spikes first, and after that, the next one connected to it spikes. The disconnection weight increases because there is a time association between these neurons. If the other way around, the connection weight decreases. Time dissociation or long-term depression. So time is learned in the connections, and the neurons can be at different spatial locations. So now we have neurons, spiking neurons, to learn time and space information. And that is a huge departure from the traditional neural networks and machine learning techniques. Time is here. Well, this was unsupervised learning, but now supervised learning means that we want to make one neuron spike when a particular input pattern is presented to this neuron at different times. We can see time is here. And we can make this neuron change the connection weight so that, using some rules, for example, first order spikes increase more the connection weights, so that this neuron can spike when this pattern is presented here. But something more. If we have this coefficient that adjusts the membrane potential, the threshold of the membrane potential that makes this neuron spikes, this neuron can spike early, say only 70%. Excuse me, of the information can be presented and this neuron will spike. And that is how I can train a robot to catch up a ball when I throw this ball to the robot, because the robot can be adjusted to spikes early, to move its hand and to catch the ball. So this is early, predictive, dynamic behavior of a spiking neuron. Now I can build whole spiking neural networks, and we can have spiking neurons here. We can have frame-based or vector-based information. This vector-based is encoded into spikes, and neurons are generated, spiking neurons are generated based on the input information. For every input vector, we have a new neuron output neuron generated. So this is called evolving spiking neural network for vector-based data, used very much for streaming data. And we have publications by Lobo. We have Maciak predicting pollution in London using sensory information. And this is a very much popular model, which is called evolving spiking neural networks. We can also arrange incremental supervised learning of dynamic data in a dynamic evolving spiking neural network. And this is something that we developed as part of Marie Curie visited a professorship at the Institute for Neuroinformatics in Zurich, Switzerland. And when the first spike comes and the first connection weight is changed, then the following spikes change connection weight either up if there's a spike next time or down if there is no spike next time. So this is called dynamic evolving spiking neural network. Now, are spiking neural networks good to extract some rules, to extract some knowledge, and to understand what they do? Well, yes, we should say that fuzzy rules are possible to extract from traditional neural networks that are scalar-based or called evolving fuzzy neural networks, along with the spiking neural networks. And spiking neural networks, if we have one variable just input, encode it into several receptive fields and spikes, and this is a classifier that classifies this vector here, just one variable, into two classes. If we observe the connection weights, we can see that small connection weights are going to class CI, and large connection weights are going to CJ. So fuzzy rules can also be extracted from spiking neural networks. And this is, of course, to remind us of the late Lotfi-Zadeh, who originated fuzzy logic and fuzzy rules. Now, these were very simple spiking neural networks, just few neurons, but can we build brain-inspired spiking neural networks? And here's one example, which is called NeuCube. Brain-inspired spiking neural networks are characterized by first encoding all continuous information from different sources or locations into spike trains. Second, using a brain template to structure a three-dimensional spiking neural network so that one neuron from the spiking neural network corresponds to whole area in the brain, using a template from the brain. And then this tube can be trained with the spike time-dependent plasticity rule, with the encoded data to produce some outputs, and these outputs can be used to improve the functioning of the network. And this is one realization called NeuCube architecture, where we have the cube structured as a brain template. We have the inputs, we have the outputs, and we have some optimization techniques. It was published in 2014 in Neural Networks. Now, how do we encode data into spikes? First, we can use some principles from the brain again. For example, the retinotopic. When the pixel is increasing, there is a spike, a buffer threshold, of course. Decreasing, there is a negative spike. And we can use also principles from the cochlea, where sounds at different frequencies are perceived in different parts of the cochlea and transformed into spike trains. So both principles are very useful, and I will demonstrate them in some applications later. After we encode the data into spikes, we have to structure our spiking neural network, and different templates can be used, brain templates, to make our structure to represent structurally a human brain. And this is a total Talleyrand template. Now we can build the spiking neural network that takes some data, spikes, activates some neurons at certain places, and then connections are built based on these actions. So these connections represent certain patterns that can be classified or used to control some control functions. We can extract some rules from the spiking neural networks to understand what they do. We can extract some rules that represents the spatial organization of the spiking neural network, having also a brain template. We can also investigate the interaction between different input variables, for example, channels in EEG data. And if we look at them, we can see that some channels or some parts of the brain exchange more information than other parts. And this is very useful information that can be turned into rules. For example, certain events happen as a function, site, time, and probability. Over time, this spiking neural network is reacting to certain inputs, and this reaction can be represented as sequence of events or as a fuzzy rule. We can also understand why particular output is activated, because we can follow the patterns of activity in the tube when a particular stimuli is presented. And this pattern of activity can be represented again as rules. In the rules, we have the area, we have the time, and we have the radius of the area activated over time, one after another, and that is why this output will be activated. Now, knowledge transfer between humans and machines. The question is, can we use this approach to build machines where we can transfer knowledge to them so they can do things in a similar way that we do these things? Well, if we measure EEG signals or fMRI signals or other brain signals, and we train a machine or tube or NeuCube on these signals, this machine can actually do some tasks like classifying or moving hands or taking a cup in a similar way that we do these things. Well, let me show you some examples. First of all, here we have the NeuCube trained on the brain signals of a person who is moving her finger. And here we have the brain signals of a person who is following the finger of the first person. So we can see that after a certain time, the brain activity synchronize, both in space and in time. This is also the diagram for the exchange of information between the EEG channels here. We can also observe the so-called transfer learning. If we train a NeuCube on certain tasks, then we add another task. New connections are created in the tube, and some of them are shared with the previous task, some of them are new. The same if I learned to take a cup, and you saw the trajectory in the brain, but then I can learn to take a box of biscuits, and the second task will share something with the first one, will share some connections. Affective computing is a very contemporary area in multimodal data analysis. And here we have one example of making a system to recognize the emotion of a person through his face and his EEG signals. So we can make computers recognize emotion. We can also make computers express emotion in a similar way that we express emotion. And here are two papers that I have cited, and this presentation will be available for the participants. Now, if we make some people do some tasks, well, this person could be a stroke patient, and this person is doing some task, and we train a system with the person's EEG signals or fMRI. The expert, the doctor, can observe what happens in the brain of the person and improve the therapy. So this is a neurofeedback that can be provided to the patient and to the doctors, because such systems are transparent. Now, learning from fMRI data is just a measurement of the whole volume of the brain over time, not as in milliseconds as the EEG signals, but this is in seconds. Still, we can build a system based on these fMRI signals, and whatever the person does when we measure the fMRI, we actually capture it here through learning, STTP learning in a tube. And in this particular, and we can extract some rules. In this particular case, the fMRI data is taken from a person who is reading a negative sentence. And we can see the trajectory of reading a negative sentence here from the tube, and we can express it as a set of actions or a rule. So this shows the transparency of this approach. And here we have a multimodal brain data captured in one model. As you know that we measure in the same brain, we can measure the fMRI data, we can measure the EEG data, but how do we put all this together in one system, in one robotic brain, if you like? Well, that is an open problem that I have several students working on and several projects for the future. Now, is it difficult to implement these brain-inspired spiky neural networks in hardware? And do we need actually to implement it in hardware? First of all, we may not need to implement it in hardware. We can use just the phone number architecture and the ideas of the first ABC machine by Atanasov and Berry. But we can also use neuromorphic architectures that are using spiking neurons implemented in hardware. And the spikes, of course, are bits at times. We can also use quantum computers, or we can use hybrid implementation. Let us have a look at the neuromorphic computation. Neuromorphic computation is something that started in 1989 and now goes along with in the University of Zurich, Giacomo Indiveri, and of course IBM developed the True North, 1 million neurons. Silicon Retina was developed by Toby Delbruck in Zurich, and it transforms immediately any video into spikes that can be further processed for recognition. And there are some other developments in spiky neural network hardware. One of the most popular one is called Spinnaker by Steve Furber and his group in Manchester. Quantum computers are here. Actually, we have some small scale quantum computers. And there is, of course, theory of representing spikes that we developed as in quantum vectors, quantum bit vectors. This is Ernest Rutherford, one of the pioneers, of course, of the quantum computing. Quantum computers are coming. How efficient they will be to represent spiky neural networks? Are they more efficient than the neuromorphic computers? That is something to be decided in the future. And software implementations are plenty of spiky neural networks. One of the development environment of NeuCube is presented here with a spinnaker board and some visualization that I already showed. Is available free. And NeuCube is available also in several implementations, from software languages to cloud to GPU and other applications. Now, along with using brain signals to train brain-inspired spiky neural networks, we can use other signals. We can use signals like vision, that is computer vision, to follow cars, and we can use this is the DVS, the artificial retina, I should say, training a NeuCube to recognize some cars, moving cars, and that could be not only cars, but could be people, could be any objects, moving objects, used for autonomous vehicles, for surveillance systems, for cybersecurity, military applications. It's a very fast information processing and very fast reaction can be achieved using spiky neural networks, in contrast to using other deep neural networks or other machine learning techniques. And here's one example where visual information from moving digits is represented to a NeuCube system, but the information, which is image information, is actually entered in the part of the NeuCube which corresponds to the visual cortex. Now this shows a superior performance than other systems on the same data. And let me say that this approach can be used to enter into NeuCube not only visual information, but audio information to the left and to the right side that correspond to the left cochlea and the right cochlea. So we can actually have a system that recognizes stereo signals. For example, we have one experiment where we train a system to recognize Mozart, Vivaldi, and Bach through signals that are learned in the system. We use the cochleogram representation here. So you can see that quite a lot of information that the human brain can perceive to the human sensors can be simulated here, can be realized here. So we can also have a system that is recognizing odor. When we enter these odor signals from the sensors to the part of the cube that corresponds to the olfactory area, I think the performance was very good. And I would like to say that we have users of NeuCube, about 50 sites, and this is my group in Auckland. Of course, I also represent the University of Ulster in the UK, which also has a very strong group on intelligent systems. Well, let me talk about advantages and disadvantages, so problems with spiky neural networks. We talk about advantages as time is in the brain-inspired spiky neural network model, and the model lives in time, as the Bulgarian revolutionary and educationary said in 1865 or something, Vasilevsky. They are self-organized, they're event-based asynchronous rather than frame-based synchronous systems. They can learn temporal and spatio-temporal information, very interpretable, flexible. And neuromorphic hardware is known for very low computational power fault and very good fault tolerance. Of course, there are some problems like sensitive to parameter values, large number of parameters to optimize, no rigid theory yet, and of course, we need to develop this theory further. I have quite a lot mentioned about these problems and applications. About 50 applications are presented here as well. I'd like to say that the future of brain-inspired intelligent systems lies in the integration that comes from neuroinformatics, from the brain, from bioinformatics, from the genetic makeup, from mathematics, physics, chemistry, engineering. And that is also covered a lot in the Handbook of Bio-Neuroinformatics by Springer. There are a lot of problems, ethical problems with this using brain signals, and some of them are very well presented and discussed in one blog, which is called mindthegap.ai. Indeed, there is a gap in this development of AI, and we have to be very careful, and this gap is ethical gap. And having said that, again, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me, and still to keep some time for questions, because I would like to learn from the audience, as I hope the audience has learned something, maybe a little bit, from this presentation. Thank you very much.